then Harold went into this unit training, and that was when I lived in the warehouse, getting ready to go overseas. Had to go through certain things which they would have to do before they could go overseas. And this whole group who were going overseas together, this whole unit, they did all these things together, learning how to do everything together, I guess. On his way over, when he went over, he got very seasick. And he was sick most of the way over there. Uh, Coming back, I guess it was a different frame of mind too, and maybe it wasn't as. It was in the springtime too, and when he went over, it was fall and winter, and that was where the storms and whatnot came up. So he did not have a good trip over. Uh, he was sick most of the time. No, it took about a week, I guess, to get over on a ship. And so I went back home to my mother and dad. Some of these people had no place they could go. I was very fortunate. I mean, I had a mother and father who welcomed me with open arms. So so I had no problem like that. I had a place to stay and everything, and being taken care of no matter what. So it was so lots of times. Uh, while we were my friends like from Huntington, if I wasn't with Harold, I was living home with my parents, and so many of my friends, especially my girlfriends, their husbands were in the same boat. They were in the army or the navy or something, and uh, so we used to get together and do things. We had to, we wanted to be together anyway, and we'd be in each other's homes because they were all doing the same thing. They were living with their families too while their husbands were not around and they couldn't be with them. So we were all in the same boat. And while he was overseas, he was traveling. This unit that he was in, the what he was doing, he was traveling with Patton's army. His small group was traveling with Patton's army because they were doing all the things to let people know, let the soldiers know what was going on if they had to have, if they were gassed or something. He had to. He was doing that kind of. That's what he was doing in the army. That's chemical warfare. A lot of traveling all around Europe while he was there. I mean, all the different countries: Austria, Germany, France, England, all these countries. He was traveling all this time. So the only way we could contact was by mail. He had gone through all these various countries following the army, the big army, with his battalion. I mean, it was quite a few men. I mean, in this number of companies make up a battalion. So, if, and he couldn't tell me much anyway. He couldn't really tell me where he was. Uh, what I wrote to him, of course, every day, and I just this APO, which is the Army Post Office. That was the only address. It could have been any place in Europe, you see. So I was never really sure where he was. So we had one ration book.
What's
You know,
that?
we had. Oh, okay, back up. During the war, you had things were rationed. You couldn't buy all the food you wanted.
Huh.
You couldn't buy all the clothing and the shoes. So all these things were rationed. You had to have a booklet which told you, which had stamps in it, uh, telling the points that you had that you could use. If you wanted to go, if say you wanted to go and you wanted to buy pork chops, say, well, if you had the money to buy it, Okay, but you also had to have the number of points in your ration book to be able to buy that food.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, see, Harold didn't have a ration book because he could have eaten at the camp.
Huh.
He could have had all his meals there. But since I was there, he wanted to eat with me.
So were you working off of your points? The
Yeah.
the two of you.
That- but he ate well in the morning for breakfast. I just made coffee, and he would go off and have because he had to be there at a certain time for reveille and all this kind of
Uh-huh.
rot. Anyway, he uh, he would have to go off early in the morning, so I just made coffee for him before he went off, before went out in the cold,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then he had to have breakfast at the camp. Um, Now, it wasn't only food that was rationed. And, uh, everybody, the whole country was rationed like this.
Huh.
Uh, you shoes were rationed. You could only buy so many pairs of shoes a year.
Mm.
Uh, your clothing was all rationed.
Hmm.
Now, I can remember before I went down with him, we had rationing. Everybody had that before we went, but I can remember uh, my school that I was teaching in, we had to stay a couple nights and help with this rationing, making out these books to give to the people. Everybody had to have a ration book
Wow.
for what they needed. And I can remember that they asked the teachers to do this, to fill out all these books for people and give them to them. And so we had to stay a couple nights so the people could come and get their ration books. But teachers were asked to do a lot of things like that in those days.
Yeah. Wow.
It wasn't only teaching then.
So how long did that ration book last you? Like, how, was it for so
Oh,
many
well,
months?
ye I guess it was a year.
Oh, a
I
year.
can't remember now, but I still have one.
Do you really?
And
Wow.
now yeah, if you didn't use, all the coupons, if you had to get change and you held on to those books and those, they had they were like tokens.
Oh.
Say it only costs, well, so say you're buying shoes and they cost $8, which was about the price of shoes in those days. Uh, and you gave them, you could get your ration book said you had enough for $10. So they would give you your change in these tokens. You held on to those books and those tokens like they were like gold, because without them you couldn't buy anything.
Wow.
You
Wow.
couldn't buy the things that were rationed. Gas was rationed,
Hmm.
and to drive a car was quite a feat in those days too. If you didn't have the book, the ration book with the coupons and to give them, you couldn't buy it,
Wow.
no matter how much you wanted to spend for it.
And in the general population, were people mostly patient and calm and kind about using that system?
You know what? You know what? They had to be, I think. They wanted to be. The whole country was and so entirely different.
Yeah.
Everybody put everything they had into the war effort.
Huh.
And people acted very differently then. It was
Hmm.
very, very different because everybody was willing to do this,
Yeah.
because we had to get this war settled. Well,
Yeah.
we were in two wars really, in Europe and then again in Asia, you
Wow.
know.
Wow.
So everybody would do their utmost to do what they could for this.
Huh.
And so I think the climate of the actions of the people was very different.
Yeah.
Because almost every family, I'm sure, had someone in the service,
Oh.
you know,
Yep. Yep. That makes a difference.
and it certainly made a difference.
Yeah.
Nobody griped about if they couldn't get certain items of food. If you could get something, that was fine.
Yeah. Wow.
We were never hungry. That I can tell you. I mean, we
Oh,
always plenty of food. Maybe not what you wanted at that time.
yeah.
It's food.
Huh.
Well, as I say, it was very, very different.
Yeah.
But everybody was willing to do their part
Huh.
because it was their life really,
Yeah.
and the life of their loved ones always.
Right.
This is very different.
Yeah.
And people who complain now, I don't have any sympathy for them. That's why they had to have rationing because people would have done stuff like that because that's the way people are. I mean, that's normal people. Oh, I'm gonna have it because, and they'd stock up on it. But they couldn't do that in those days because they couldn't buy it unless they had the coupons. But it was canned goods, meat, clothing, shoes, clothing. Yes. Hmm. You had to have, if you wanted to buy say a sweater, well, you had to have the money plus so many points on you, so many ration points. Well, so you see, factories were all going to war efforts. Things that were making clothing, they were making uniforms for soldiers and sailors, and that was more important than the people at home. But one day was last year, I guess. One of my friends teaching in a middle school asked me if I would come and talk to her class about what it was like for the civilians in during the war,
Oh.
which I did, of course.
Uh-huh.
And the kids found it very interesting
Oh yeah. I mean, it's so
because I
much
thought,
easy. It's so much more interesting when you talk to somebody who actually was living through it.
yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I did. I had ration books still, and I took that stuff with them, and V-mail and all that kind of stuff I can talk about,
Yeah.
which I did with that class. Everything went to the war effort. Everything in the country, no matter what was going on, the main thing was the war effort. We've got to get this war to end because we were fighting two wars. You see, we were fighting one in Europe against Hitler, and we were fighting one in Japan. But it brought the country back. That brought the country like this together. Everybody was, you know, it wasn't pulled apart like it is today. Everything, everybody was together in those days, uh, not like separated the way they are today. Everything, everybody did everything that they could to help. It's when there was a drive for something like metals and so forth, everybody put all their things out that they could possibly, do. Paper drives. It wasn't that it was like today where you have your paper, uh, your newspapers. Uh, you saved them all, and then they would pick up, and that was for the war effort. Everything was for the war effort. So you did everything you could to help. They there were there were the political parties have always been, but everything was joined in those days. The parties were not separated. Everybody did anything you did, it was for the war effort. We could have that if we had that today, it would be so different. There's a lot that, and I'm the only one now being of an age when I can talk about these things. Oh, you had to do so many things. You had to have blackout shades on your windows, which were black. I mean, black. I don't know. There must have been some kind of paper, something or other. I don't know. But anyway, at night you had to pull those down so that lights would not go out. Street lights were not on. You didn't drive. Well, you didn't drive much anyway because gas was so rationed. We just all felt this had to be because everybody had in their family there were people who were in the war, soldiers, sailors. My brother was a sailor, so I had someone in the army and someone in the navy. He was 5 years younger than I, But then when he finished high school, he uh, went into the Navy. He enlisted in the Navy, and so he was away then. Well, he was there part of the time when I was there, but being 5 years younger, you see. Uh, but he enlisted in the Navy, so then he was not home either. He was he was he was only 18. Well, he was 18. He wasn't skipped around in elementary school the way I was, Harold. So he graduated at 18 normally. So, but everybody had somebody in the service, I'm sure. And uh, you just did what you had to, and everybody was willing to. Well, everybody felt it so personally. I mean, you had someone who was in the service. You couldn't buy certain things even if you had the money because it just wasn't available. Oh, something that was interesting. If you had someone in the service, anyone who was in the service, they had flags made. Uh, it was red, white, and blue. Not an American flag, but it was a flag. Oh, about 12 by 18 or something like that. And there was a star on it. If you had someone, a blue star on it, if you had someone from that house who was in the service, you hung that in your window. So uh, my mother had, uh, for my brother, and then I also had one in my bedroom window for Harold. Uh, that was, but someone from that house was it, which was almost every house. I mean, it would, that someone in that house was in the service. So parents whose child was in the service, or if it was a wife whose husband was in the service or whatever, it was if you saw that, you knew someone from that family was in the service. The men who were still here were working in war industries, like Harold's father, who had been a jeweler. Now, during the war, people weren't buying jewelry. So, anyway, uh, he decided he would do something else because you weren't making a living being a jeweler in those days. So, he decided on Long Island, there were a couple of airplane factories. There was Grumman, there was Republic, and they were making airplanes here. And he decided he'd go for a job in one of these airplane factories. Was what he did because he couldn't be a jeweler when nobody was buying jewelry during the war. Well, he did not actually have a store of his own. He worked. He worked. He was like, I don't know what you'd call him, but he would go around in New York City to all the jewelry stores, and they would tell if someone went to a store and say, "Now I want a jade necklace." This is people did that in those days. I want a jade necklace for my wife. So he knew he would go to all these stores all the time, and he would find out. He knew which jewelers specialized in jade. So he would go to them, and he would pick up various bracelets, and he would bring them then to this store. He was like a middleman or something, I guess you'd call. I don't know exactly what you would have called him. During the war, was not going on. But he got this job in Grumman's where they made airplanes. So anyway, after the war then, he wanted to get back in jewelry or something different. Again, he didn't know what he wanted then because they were closing up some of these factories, uh, where they were making airplanes at the time. So that was what he did during the war because of this. Well, I still have Harold's army uniform. I just couldn't throw it out. It's funny. I try to throw things away, and I'll go through things. Oh, I can't throw this away. No, I better hang on. It's very difficult to throw things away. I try so hard to get rid of things, you know, and I can't do it. I'll say, oh, even though it's recent things, or it's not way back maybe, but I think, oh, gee, maybe I really want that. Why? So I feel sorry for Judy and Wendy. They're gonna have to get rid of stuff.